And next up, we have Tiell joining us. And he was a panelist, right? Remember Stephen. But I want to give a little bit more information regarding his background because he's really pretty doggone interesting. He's a technologist, an entrepreneur, and a sustainable strategy executive at Accenture. He leads for Accenture their thought leadership for their technology vision. And that's the firm's premier thought leadership publication, which directs Accenture and their top tier clients towards the R&D investments for the future, really guiding a lot of the growth. Most of his career has focused on high impact and highly scalable projects in the public sector. For example, while he was at Cisco Systems, he helped them build an innovative go-to-market strategy that became the current Internet of Everything and smart connected community initiatives. So I am pleased to turn it over to what he called himself the digital disruptor.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank all of you for being here. I'm so pleased that Peter Miskovich invited me to talk to all of you today and introduce me to the team here at Unwired with Kate and Isabel and Cindy. They're just great, and the whole Unwired team. So thank you very much. As Cindy mentioned, the technology vision is Accenture's premier thought leadership. And so my team spends about half of the year doing research and writing the technology vision. You can all download it later after the conference at accenture.com/technologyvision. And we spend the other half of the year kind of proliferating that message. And we do things with client workshops and help them direct investments that they make in technology, as well as within Accenture itself. And we also talk at conferences and such as this. The interesting thing to me about technology is that anthropologically speaking, and I'm following a great person who talked about this before as well, is that technology is really just a tool to help us accomplish other tasks. Whether this was 1,000 years ago in the agricultural revolution where animals were domesticated, that was a great technology to help plow fields and so forth, to the Industrial Revolution where mechanization helped us build things much more efficiently, to the tools and technologies of today, which are really allowing us to be disruptive in the business that we do. Again, it's just a tool. So the difference with today is that the digital revolution affects every part of our lives. And that notion is really why I talk about the digital workforce as the disrupting entity for the enterprise itself. We're bringing those tools and technologies as consumers into the workplace, and that's actually the disruptive enabler to enterprises today. And key to this is really that the consumers are driving the market. And this is true in a lot of different aspects, but when we look at it in the context of business, we see that consumers are really, the businesses that reach out to their customers and try to understand what's happening are really the businesses that are leading the competitors. And we see this as feedback loops. And the shortening of these feedback loops is really what causes this digital disruption to accelerate and to occur. And the companies that are really good at mastering these feedback loops are the digital disruptors that are leading the wave. So the first trend that I want to talk about is the digital physical blur, or what I like to call as decisions on the edge. And it's really about blurring this line between our digital and physical worlds. That line is vanishing. And as we look at kind of the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything or the industrial Internet, it's that sensors are being put in things, cars and buildings and cities, and that's leading to actions being taken in the real world, where we're having this blur between what happens in the virtual world is now being able to impact our physical environments. How many of you are wearing quantified self devices right now? Go ahead, raise your hand proud. Let me see them. Not too many, that's shocking. Okay, a couple waves, okay, a little more shy. But we're seeing this this notion of kind of those decisions being pushed to the edge that help people understand how they're sleeping better, how they're exercising better. And this is really getting into many different parts of our lives. And it's not just about what's happening at business, but what's happening at home as well as other places. And we see this enabling new transportation paradigms, for instance, with unmanned aerial vehicles. We like to refer to them as drones, but cars can be drones too. And these items are going to completely disrupt industries globally. You look at how many drivers, many of you probably took Uber within the last 2 days, right? Look at how many drivers will be displaced when driverless cars start taking over those jobs. It's really interesting in how that is going to impact our lives. Robotics the same way. Many of us are staying in hotels. The cleaning staffs will start going away later this year as service robots are introduced in the hospitality industry. So these are disruptive trends that are going throughout. And we look at this applied to businesses as well, and the way that we network together and organizational structures. We see this movement starting kind of in Silicon Valley around holacracy. And this is the flattening of organizations. And as we move down this line, we're starting to see where individual contributors can really be pushed to the edge of the network. No longer do we have the situation where people are wanting to go up the ranks to have more impact. We're starting to see some companies, innovators in the field, companies like Yammer, who are allowing their frontline workers to really have that impact that they've wanted for so long. And we're seeing those organizations have a small executive team that's leading the strategic direction of the company, another very small layer of middle managers that are kind of coordinating between departments, and then an awfully fat bottom layer that's really impacting the change and implementing that change. And they're empowered like they never were before through technology. And that is really, as you've heard from previous people, that's really changing the organizational structure of business, all enabled through these kind of decisions on the edge. The next topic that I alluded to this morning as well is really this notion of the workforce going to crowdsource. And I talked about the rise of the borderless enterprise. And if I were to ask you who's the biggest company in the world according to number of employees, how many of you would say Walmart? Some hands. Okay, the largest company is actually Jubeji. They have nearly 10 million employees, not in offices, but distributed throughout China. And they're a crowdsourcing company that does one-off tasks. Many of their upper echelon members are making more than $1 million a year performing highly skilled tasks for a distributed number of employees. This is the borderless enterprise of the future. Your employees will work for different masters, and that's okay. Can your business adapt to that? We see this in a number of other sectors as well. An example we use in the vision is about Local Motors. And Local Motors is this small company that's really kind of tapped the passion of car enthusiasts to design the cars, to build the cars, and everything in between. And excuse me. And they've done this so well that BMW is actually going to use some of their talent and some of the networks that they've built to redesign the interiors of BMW cars because, as the previous speaker was talking about, it's really about engaging the stakeholders, engaging the people who use your products to design something that's even better. And a lot of times you can get this talent, this passionate talent, for absolutely nothing. What organization isn't interested in that? In the future, that's the future of how we do real innovation. We see this, Eli Lilly started this competition that they've then spun out as Innocentive. 300,000 registered problem solvers across 200 countries. There's been almost 2,000 rewards given, of 5,000 to over $1 million, and to solve complex scientific and engineering challenges. These are not people who work for these firms, but Eli Lilly had so much success with biomedicine and so forth that they spun it out to other sectors like materials engineering. So enabling this is that we can make work more modular. And data-driven digital workflows allow us to make work more modular. It enables work to be distributed across geographies. It enables work to be tailored to appropriate pools of talent. And what's interesting, if we can incorporate gamification technologies in some of this modularized work, we can get people to be much more efficient. We can get them to compete with each other, have a lot of fun. They're more productive, they're collaborative, they're engaged, and we can even bring contextual information to the work that wasn't possible before. So gamification is going to really kind of change the way that we engage with our work, especially as that work becomes more distributed. And this isn't limited to work either. We see this in open source software, where a lot of the companies, the HPs and Microsofts of the world who used to say, absolutely not, we'll never use open source, there's too many intellectual property issues, have now completely embraced it and said, this is the way of the future. They have brought some of the most prolific, advanced minds from the open source community into their fold to lead the charge and really transform how their organization looks at open source. And that's not limited to software anymore. We see it with hardware, with Facebook starting the Open Compute project. And now there's so much client demand for Open Compute. And I'll talk a little bit more about hyperscale systems in a little bit and how that's changing. But even product reviews. No longer does your marketing team need to hire a couple dozen or 10 dozen focus groups. They can go to Facebook and for free have 125,000 people comment and review their products and give them insights that they can build something even better, tapping down into the roots of their customer base and really bubbling up those innovations, ideas, and they can tap that market for free. Central to a lot of this is the data supply chain. And traditionally, we see data as really siloed, uncoordinated, and haphazard within organizations. There's not a lot of sharing going on. A recommendation we give to a lot of our clients where appropriate is to look at hiring a chief data officer, someone who can coordinate data among all of these siloed groups throughout the organization. They can make data accessible to others through APIs. And APIs is absolutely critical for the data supply chain of the future. APIs allow sharing of data where the publishers can still control what data is exposed outside of their domain. How do you actually share data between apps? It's all about the API. The opportunity to drive revenue from data has been lost so far. Nobody wants to pay for raw data. It's not interesting to anybody. But what they want to pay for is insights. Insight is what we can derive from the data after we apply some analytics to it, and the right analytics, when we're asking the right questions. A great example of this is a company called Kabbage, Kabbage with a K. And what Kabbage does is near real-time loan decisions for e-commerce companies. So you go to Kabbage.com, you have an e-commerce company, you put in your web address, and Kabbage goes out to UPS and says, give me the insight for this company. And UPS knows what shipments you're getting in, what shipments you're putting out, and what they assemble from that is an insight number. And that single insight number helps the loan decision to be made in near real time. That's their market differentiator. So Kabbage is able to get back within minutes whether your loan is approved for your e-commerce company. It's completely disruptive, and it's completely enabled by that insight, by the data supply chain that UPS is offering out to the marketplace. And when we look at that data supply chain, we really look at it across two dimensions. The first is that data that leads to insight, that leads to decision spaces that we can finally take action from. So when you're a manager, it's not enough to just have an insight. You really want a decision space that you're looking at that insight within context of other insight, within context of other business information. And then it's easy for you to make an informed decision, not just a decision from your gut. And as we look at the broader picture, we look at data producers, and this can be applications, this can be sensors, this can be surveys, anything where you're driving data from. That's going to data manipulators, which is oftentimes the aggregators, the people that are putting analytics against that data, and ultimately to data consumers, whether this is you on your mobile device as you're getting a recommendation for what restaurant to eat at tonight, or business consumers that are looking for other objectives. So powering this data revolution is hyperscale computing. And we're one of the only firms talking about this today. And this was really revolutionary for us when we stumbled across this. And we said, you know, what's really enabling this is that there's essentially 5 firms out there that are operating at web scale or at hyperscale today. The biggest by far is Google. Then comes Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and Yahoo. And those last 3 are about an order of magnitude less than the top 2. And what they're able to do is expand at scale their computing power. And we're starting to see some of that seep into the enterprise through appliances, such as SAP HANA, which allows some of its customers to do processing jobs 1,000,000 times faster than what was previously possible. I won't get into some of the technology that enables that, but that's kind of sexy too to some of us geeks. But we also see this kind of seeping into some organizations who are looking at that hyperscale capacity and that data as a strategic business opportunity. Companies like GM have said, we're done with outsourced IT, and we're bringing that in-house. We're building our own data centers because we need to understand how to do this because data is going to be critical to our business moving forward. BMW is doing the same thing. Their top model right now, I think it's of car, sends about 1 gigabyte of data a month back to their servers in order to process analytics on how that car is performing to give engineers more insight into how to design a better car. What a beautiful crowdsourced way to get that bottom-up insight in an automated way that's seamless to its users. So that brings us to the business of applications. And here's where that idea of the worker transforming the enterprise really kind of hits home. So for a decade, workers have been bringing their devices into the office. And finally, businesses are starting to realize that they have to pay attention to this. It really shifts the way that businesses engage with technology because the consumers are demanding it. I say consumers because they're consumers first and employees second. And they're really driving that demand. Employees want to use apps. They don't want to use some ERP system that they can't understand that doesn't have a pretty interface. The job is on the back end for those APIs to be able to really understand how I can link that data together, present it in a usable way so my worker can actually work on exactly what she wants to work on, when she wants to work on it, where she wants to work on it, and this needs to happen in the cloud. $100 million ERP systems aren't completely gone. There are niche applications for those where they're still completely appropriate. But today's technology adapts to the worker. The worker no longer needs to adapt to the technology. And if your company's not there today, most of them aren't, you will be. The last trend I want to talk about is architecting resilience. And as I said before, technology must match the worker. Workers expect to be able to do things on their schedule, not on somebody else's. So when your worker is at home at night after the rest of the family has gone to bed, they want to be able to pull out their device and make sure that, oh, I can accomplish this half-hour worth of work to make my day a little lighter tomorrow. Maybe I need to leave early to go to the soccer game. I can get that done. If you're a global enterprise, when is a good time for downtime? When do I do upgrades on my system? That doesn't exist anymore. Your systems must be always on. They must be always available, and they must be there on demand when the worker wants to work. We're learning from companies like Facebook and Google how to do rolling upgrades rather than taking entire systems down to do that. Employees provide the tools as well. That last mile to the employee is often their smartphone or tablet. And in many companies, the bring your own device policy enables that to happen. So systems really need to be resilient to disruptions as well. Whether that's natural disasters or cyber attacks, that's really important. So the future of work trend is really woven throughout all of the trends in the technology vision. And we're really at the precipice of a new industrial age. That IoT system that I talked about earlier is changing the way we do everything. The amount of data, the way that it's processed, the way that it's shared. It's all changing every aspect of our lives. And so what I challenge your businesses to do is, one, move decisions to the edge. Look for opportunities to empower that frontline worker. Look for opportunities to tear down silos. Look for opportunities to increase transparency and really move those decisions to the edge. Number two is to maximize your iteration capital. Maximize the use of those feedback loops. Get them short. Get people used to iterating, because that's the way that the world is moving. And finally, take bigger steps than you think you're comfortable with. Because by the time the technology, or by the time the rollout gets there, the technology will be there and the people will be receptive to it, more so than what they are today. Thank you.
Some questions?
Sure.
Okay, any questions for Stephen? Okay, I've got one. Oh, Peter.
I think you've used up all your questions for the day,
Thank you.
Peter.
My quote is up. Peter Miskovic, JLL. How would you translate the technology vision to the workplace of the future, Steve, both from an Accenture perspective and to share with the audience that translational value?
Wow. That's a great question. So I think it's less and less about a physical place. It's more about the interactions that we have with each other, and it's really about the interactions that the connection the worker has with the work that she's doing. We really see, the business of applications kind of driving that notion where consumer technologies are driving change at work. And this idea that I mentioned earlier of being able to work wherever you want, that oftentimes is not the office. It's oftentimes a coffee shop. How do you translate security protocols that you might have behind a firewall within a physical facility to the cloud? And what we're seeing a lot of investment in the VC community over the last year, and certainly the whole NSA Snowden situation has catalyzed that as well and kind of brought that into a spotlight. But how do we secure data in the cloud, and how do we allow businesses to own that encryption end to end, right? So that they don't need someone else to verify that they have secure data, that they know from their IT operations that they own the security end to end, regardless of where that data sits. It allows other things like being able to burst into the hybrid cloud when your data center goes down, or when you have a specific opportunity. For instance, financial services firms, if there's especially the algorithmic traders, if there's a specific opportunity that they can capitalize on, but they don't have the processing power to do that. They can offload some of that peak power to hybrid cloud or public cloud resources, and still make considerable money, but keep that connection encrypted and secure throughout end-to-end communications. And I think that's really what I see is kind of driving that connection, is how do we allow people and work to happen anywhere and everywhere.
Any other questions? Okay, question for me.
Sure.
Is Dan Johnson has been a beloved member of Worktech.
Yes.
He runs corporate real estate and workplace strategy at Accenture. Knowing the two of you are starting to kind of mash up, what types of things is Accenture going to be doing or is doing now based upon these types of technology trends in the workplace?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I can answer that. So one thing that helps all of us really is this immediacy of communication. And the more that we can drive that communication to be more personal, the better it is. So instant messaging is a tool revered by people throughout the organization, right? At Accenture and at companies elsewhere. And bringing video into that conversation has been a challenge for a while, right? The tools are there, but oftentimes the bandwidth isn't. And connecting, when you have your telepresence system, connecting to clients is also kind of a challenge, right? Because those systems are generally fairly closed. So I think in the future what we're going to see is that those systems will become more open, and we'll be able to have more of those personal connections, not just within the enterprise, but they're going to be external as well, and it'll be more available on an individual basis rather than having to reserve a room in a place.
Very good. Well, wonderful. The final question that I've got is, where can people get the report?
Oh, great, thank you. Accenture.com/technologyvision.
Wonderful. Let's give a round of applause to Stephen.